Coming up as we make our way towards training camp for the Brooklyn Nets and the NBA at large, Damian Lillard. He's still a Portland Trailblazer. We update where the market stands, how there could be more Eastern Conference teams involved, what that would mean for the Nets, and also why the NBA at large may be keeping an eye on another superstar and keeping those assets dry. Let's get into it next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's Jase medical.com. And Doug, in case you didn't know, there are disgruntled superstars around the NBA, and Damian Lillard was, of course, at one point tied heavily to the Brooklyn Nets. We may have gotten away from that scenario, Dame to Brooklyn, but now a new one is coming out here, as we'll talk about Mark Spears' appearance on NBA Today, that suggests maybe he could still be closer than we would like in the Eastern Conference and not on Miami.
Well, it's interesting because as we get closer, we start getting into the discomfort zone here with guys like Lillard. The Nets saw this with Durant, right? Don't think back, a year ago with Durant here, and they'd sort of gathered around the campfire and held hands just long enough to get into the season without the trade demand continuing on. But that doesn't seem like it's really happened here with Lillard. And the Nets are not in the running here at all for it, but I think they're still around the periphery of this situation enough that it's worth monitoring. And like you said, if the idea is like maybe it's not even going to be Miami, it's going to be somewhere else in the Eastern Conference, this is still very much a Nets relevant situation, even though it's died down considerably. But it hasn't died down because the situation's changed. It's died down because the market just kind of cooled off and everyone went on vacation for the summer. And then now they're starting to ramp things back up because this is still as relevant a situation as it was when we were talking about it daily back in the spring, because Lillard,
for sure,
this is very, and I think the Nets aren't even completely out of it either. I don't think they're going to get Lillard necessarily, but being a team that's in and around this situation, I think that this is something that we very much need to continue put back on our radar, I guess is what I'm saying.
Sure. The other thing, too, here is I'll say Mark Spears, as I mentioned there at the top, had an appearance on NBA Today, and he was asked about the situation. And he said that the latest I'm hearing is that the Blazers have been talking to several teams, but I don't even know if that's necessarily the Blazers that are pushing that versus, and I'm saying this, the Miami angle and what they're looking to accomplish and what those packages have looked like. But when you say several teams, Mark mentioned, that also suggests that they could be willing to send Lillard to somewhere that is not the Miami Heat, which is certainly very curious. It's one thing for a team to trade for a player that doesn't want to really be there, but it's another thing to trade for a top 75 that's going to be a professional, but will he really be a happy employee? He goes on to suggest that teams in the Eastern Conference not named Miami, like maybe the Boston Celtics or a mystery Eastern Conference team that he stopped short of officially labeling because he didn't feel comfortable to say it at this time. That's what I think made this interesting, is not necessarily for the Brooklyn Nets directly and pursuing him, as you said, Damian Lillard, but when you hear that other and potentially Eastern Conference teams get involved here, that's where I think it gets a little hairier from a Nets perspective, because it just adds another potential competitive high-level team in the East relative to what the Nets' goals are this season.
Yeah, and the Nets, so a couple things here. One, the part where the Nets could get involved, there's almost always going to have to be 3 teams into these trades because of the way things are set up for Lillard and what the lack of resources that some of these other teams that might really want him have to send out, right? It's one thing to be sitting on a treasure trove of young talent and picks, but those teams aren't trading for Damian Lillard. right? So those teams aren't interested in bringing on sort of an aging superstar with a pretty massive contract. So I think like that's one thing that we just probably need to be aware of. And then the other teams in the East, like I'm not surprised. What I'm not surprised about is as the market has somewhat cooled here, right? Like if it was going to be a non-Miami team, that if other teams might say, oh, the market's not as robust here for Lillard as we thought it was going to be at the start. Now it's maybe it's doable that we can get in this thing. Whereas at the beginning, if it was like, hey, you're going to need a massive package, you're going to need to bring all the picks and all the players or whatever, I can see why like teams in other Eastern Conference teams, let's say, wouldn't have been all that excited about that prospect. But if it looks much more gettable because the Miami offer is not that attractive, we know that's the case now, then why not? Like Lillard's still really good. It's really nothing. It's not a talent driven narrative around why you wouldn't want to trade for him. There's other considerations, but there's certain teams you could put him on now. Philly, Milwaukee, Boston. Like you could put him on any of these teams and they would be title contenders right away.
Yeah,
right away. Because he's that good.
And that's to your point, and we'll get into some of these specific teams, who we think would be specific teams, as well as another superstar in Giannis that is maybe impacting how teams look at the Dame market. But just to your point, we said there at the opening around Kevin Durant and just narrowly getting into the season, but ultimately ending up with a trade. It feels very much like it's different in that vein.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if I do know, Miami's not desperate enough as maybe we saw with the Suns for Kevin Durant, where they were like, yeah, whatever it takes. I'm a new owner. I want him, all the picks, all the players. Let's do this thing. So they stopped short of that. And then even the draft capital, it feels like maybe teams are less inclined to part ways with, not just because of the age. Kevin Durant was also old, but Damian Lillard and the position that he plays, right? I think that this is a player that adds to your championship opportunity, but unto himself does not move the needle the way that a Kevin Durant does. And that seems to be slowing this process, certainly as long as it's taken over the course of summer.
When Kevin Durant's healthy, he's a top 5 player in the NBA. That's it may be higher, right? So I don't think, and Lillard's just not that guy even on his best day. He's great, so it's not a knock against him. Just the Durant's just at a totally different level. No, I think the Durant situation is completely different for a lot of different things. Like one, they were able to make amends going into the season because there was still some championship aspirations, right? You still got Kyrie. The team's still looking pretty good. They kind of need Durant. It's clear
Portland
here that the
Blazers,
the Blazers
no want on Dame that we're going to get back into this year.
100%, right? So there was some leverage there on the net side to say, well, we don't have to do this. This team is still really good, right? And that's just not the case for the Blazers. So it is a really unique situation because this team clearly wants to move on. Dame clearly wants to move on. And now they're just trying to find a suitable partner. That's why I actually think, we'll talk a little bit more about this, about how far the market could drop here, because I just don't think anyone wants to go into the season with him on the Blazers. But you're right to say that there's not going to command anywhere close to the Durant package, because that's a totally unique situation. Like you said, owner, picks, all this other stuff that's just, and just player that's just not relevant here.
So let's, coming up here in a second, dive into a couple of teams in the Eastern Conference that may be interested, and also a note on why the Portland Trailblazers saying there are several teams that they've been talking to is actually a problem for them. All
right, before we get to that, going to tell you about our friends over at Jase Medical. We've been telling you about Jase Medical. That's because you just have to hear about this company. The last thing you want to be when it comes to your medical stuff, when it comes to your health, is unprepared, waiting for doctor's appointments, waiting to get the right prescriptions, waiting to just get something diagnosed that you kind of just know what the issue is, and you just need to get it taken care of right away. This is where the Jase case comes in. It's like an absolute lifesaver. Provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. All you have to do is fill out a simple online form. Sometimes you just jump on a quick call with the Jase board certified physicians. This is a doctor-created, doctor-recommended company, so you're getting the best service, and you're going to get something. Sometimes you're just going to get what you need that very same day. You just grab a package, like you got a sinus infection, the doctor's out of town, no problem. Jase case gets you what you need that same day, so you can take care of the medical issues right away and not have to worry about it. All you have to do to make sure you are covered, and also save some money here, save more than $360 just by getting these life-saving antibiotics through Jase Medical. You go to jasemedical.com, you use the promo code Locked On, you're going to get an additional $20 off when you use that promo code. That's Jase Medical, JASE Medical.com. FanDuel.com, promo code Locked On.
Okay, so as we continue the conversation, updating the Damian Lillard market, one note when you hear the Blazers saying several teams involved, and obviously the big takeaway from Mark Spears' appearance there was just that the idea that a team that Damian does not want to go to, because he wants to go to Miami. So anyone else is making maybe the case to trade for a player that doesn't want to be there. That's the risk. But when you hear talking to several teams, to me, this is an indication that the Blazers are getting desperate, right? Because we're not fully getting what we want from Miami. They can't find the third team that we want. So now we will open it up. The preference is to send Dame where he wants to go because we know that there's a value there. Everyone's getting what they want. So let's make this thing happen. Now you're talking about maybe a little bit more of a Paul George scenario, right? When he went and stopped at OKC for a season, they try to sell him on it there. Other teams now, if the price drops, as you mentioned, then okay, we'll take the risk here. Damian Lillard's still probably he's going to show up and play. He's not going to sit out. We heard the rumors that he would not come to camp if he was traded somewhere else other than Miami. You and I both agree. Maybe that's not entirely true because he's 34, 35 years old. Like, it's not like he has time to burn here. Do you look in the Eastern Conference and see a team that would clearly say, oh, this is worth the risk of bringing in a player that may ultimately not want to be here a year from now, that may not show up in camp initially, that we'll have to convince to be a part of our team?
Yeah, I kind of rattled a few of them off I buried the lead a little bit with that by rattling them off. But I think there are teams that would do it. I question whether they have the resources to actually get it done, right? Like, so, like I said, Milwaukee, right? If you're trying to keep Giannis happy and you want to, just and give yourself like legit championship contention, Lillard would be a really pretty good fit there. They the cupboards are pretty bare after the Drew Holiday trade, so I don't really think that they would be able to get in line there. The clear one that would be Philly, but they have to get rid of Harden first, and there's no way the Blazers are taking Harden back in that deal. So I don't think that scenario really works for them, even though adding a Lillard to an Embiid situation, they'd probably give up Maxey, but you still have to get rid of Harden, right? There's just like a weirdness around how you would even get that done. I mean, do we want to say the Knicks? I'll
throw it in.
With Brunson, like it's not a fit. Like, they have Brunson under contract. He's a great value. He's not better than Lillard, but he's coming off his best season. I just don't think you can't play Brunson. You can't play those guys together. So I don't think that's really, and they might have Giannis hopes here. So I don't think that's really a team. So it's probably just those two other ones. And like you said, maybe the Celtics adding the third star there, get rid of everybody else. I don't know. They brought in Staps. I don't know. That's weird. It gets really weird. The Lillard thing's weird. I can see why the market is cool.
The other one would be, I mentioned the Knicks there, and I'll say briefly because to the point, because they have the draft capital, so they could throw a lot of picks there. But I think you accurately bring it up. Like, if this was a year ago, then you think about it a little bit differently. Adding him with Brunson, is he a better player? Yes, but is he going to change? He's going to get to a point where you'd say, well, now we need to think about moving on from Brunson in the short term, right? Because these guys won't be able to play together. So probably creates some secondary problems we want to have. The Toronto Raptors was the other team that came to mind as well, as a team that wanted to stay relevant, stay in the mix. The issue there is, when you go look at Toronto, they're going to have a hard time just putting together a package that really makes sense for Portland. I think you have young players, but you are not in a position as the Toronto Raptors to say, well, we'll give you, you're not going to give up Scotty Barnes. Will we give up OG? We have Siakam. We'll keep him there with Damian Lillard. I don't know if the back end of that looks any stronger for the Toronto Raptors in terms of really being a high-level competitive team, because you probably shed off one too many young, valuable pieces in order to get him in the door. And that to me makes it a little bit dicey for any of these teams to go with this prospect. Now,
real quick about Toronto too. Like, it's also like just totally unclear what Toronto's even doing. They lose Van Vliet. They lose Van Vliet for nothing. And they bring in Jakob Poeltl, but it's like, and they kind of sign him, but it's unclear if they still want to win. They do have no backcourt, but it's just like, I can't really tell if they're coming or going. And so it's just like, that's a situation. And I would actually be really concerned, unlike those other teams, like maybe Milwaukee, where there's another clear superstar. It's like Milwaukee with Giannis, or Boston with Tatum, or Embiid, where you could probably sell Lillard on not being unhappy with the situation. I
Sure.
feel like Toronto would be a much harder sell. Like, just, it's in Canada. There's no clear superstar. I don't know. I feel like you'd be in the same asking out scenario right away. So that's like
Yeah.
the one that kind of, I agree with you. They could really use him if they wanted to make a push, but that would be the one that would be most fraught with peril in terms of like his overall attitude, I think.
Now we're going to get into, obviously, if you want, I want to go to the Giannis angle of this when it comes to not only the Brooklyn Nets, but the East at large, the NBA at large. How many of these teams, Nets included, are now sitting here and saying there's enough smoke around the Giannis situation that there could be a fire there that we want to make sure we have all these assets for. And I listen, maybe even Miami to that extent. Why wouldn't Miami be taking a bit of a pause here and saying, yeah, we're all in on getting Dame Lillard? Unless you tell me that a year from now we can bring Giannis down to South Beach and start to reconstruct our team going forward around one of the best players in the game, right? So I think everybody takes this collective pause now on the Damian Lillard scenario, and it makes me wonder, if you're Dame and you truly want it out, expanding it a little bit wider sooner is always probably the better bet, right? Because you give yourself an opportunity for more teams to come to the market with best possible packages where you can get into a good landing spot. It's not going to be Miami, okay, but you could have gotten somewhere where you could be on a championship caliber team. Now, at least some of them have taken themselves, looked at their roster and said, no. Like the Knicks is a great example. Could this have been a scenario? Maybe, but that looks like it's far less likely than it could be going forward. Coming up here in a second, we'll get Doug's take on not only on the Giannis situation and keeping the Nets assets dry, but then also, what does it mean if an Eastern Conference team not named Miami, not named Boston, comes in and gets Damian Lillard? The Brooklyn Nets are hanging on to the back end of that playoff picture, at least as we perceive it. What would that look like if all of a sudden the Nets get bumped down one more spot in the pecking order? We dive into that coming up in a second.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Why the number one? Well, new customers are going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. All you have to do on FanDuel is place a $5 real money bet. $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. You head over to FanDuel. They got really everything you could ever want here. Spreads, money lines, totals, player props. Maybe do a little same game do a little parlay action here. The Giants coming up here Thursday, plus 420 against the Niners. The Jets plus 124 at home. It's gone south real quick for NFL teams there, but not on FanDuel. This is where you throw a couple dollars on here. You're going to get plus 1065 odds on these teams over on FanDuel. This is what we're talking about. FanDuel's got everything. Like I said, spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. And you're going to get those $200 in bonus bets. Win or lose with just a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL.
Okay, so wrapping up our conversation here, obviously updating the state of the market for Damian Lillard, which at a minimum seems to have cooled off since this all first began and ran through the course of this summer. Now with Giannis on the table, Doug, obviously teams are going to be impacted. Decisions are going to be impacted. Let's just start Nets-centric. The Nets have to be excited. Fans were clamoring. Maybe we should go after Dame Lillard. Maybe we should use those assets. The Nets say, hold on. There's an even better, younger, brighter superstar that maybe we want to keep ourselves available for.
Yeah, so Giannis has really made it clear. He's doubled and tripled down on this almost over the course of the summer by just basically telling anyone who's listening that the team needs to get it together and, make a push to win, and that he wants to see guys. I'm paraphrasing a lot of this stuff. He wants to see guys that are putting in the same work ethic as him, like time away from his family. Go ahead.
I do like that, like every time he's done these interviews, I'm not being honest. Every time he does it, like, love Milwaukee, love being in Milwaukee, love what we accomplished. But also, if I don't see what I want to see from the team, the organization, if I see somewhere else I could do better, maybe I got to go do better. Like, it's he's like, oh yeah, no, listen, love it at home, having a great time at home. But I did notice the bar's running a special tonight. Maybe I'll just go out maybe I'll just put my toe in the water. So he's very much on the fence right now.
Yeah, this is like a little out of the LeBron playbook of pushing, stepping your foot down on the neck of the organization and put pressure on them and kind of hold it over their head that you would leave instead. I don't have a problem with it necessarily. The problem with Milwaukee is that, like I say, they've kind of tapped themselves out here. There's really not that many ways they can go to improve the team long term. So I think if you're these other teams, like we've mentioned already, that were sort of perceived to possibly be in the Giannis sweepstakes, you really have to pump the brakes now because in the Lillard sweepstakes, you really have to pump the brake because if Giannis is coming out on the block here in a year, you definitely want to have all of your powder dry 100% because you definitely want Giannis, right? Like Giannis is that like Durant level guy of just like organization shifting. Maybe he's not going to age this. He almost definitely is not going to age the same way Durant has, just because of the jump shot and the way he plays. Like there could be maybe, a real cliff for him when it comes to his overall talent. But regardless, like right now, if he came or in a year, if he came on the board, you'd be sick if you use everything you had to get Lillard and Giannis was a year away and would have come there. Right. And so I think that actually has to really have some of these teams looking at it very closely and saying Lillard would be nice, but if we're just trying to make a decision and we could be in the running here next year, like we just have to keep everything ready. That's why, I think the Knicks have to be a favorite to get him, right? Like they have so much capital and he fits a position that they definitely need. Like unlike I don't think the Knicks are in the Lillard thing, so I don't think that's a problem, but some of these other teams too, you just have to look at the situation. Like when guys like Durant, when guys like Giannis, when these guys come up and they say they want to be traded, you are doing yourself a disservice by not being ready to at least try to trade for them.
And by the way, just on the Giannis front, when we talk about, because I pulled up in the background, well, maybe they want to pursue Damian Lillard because they want to keep Giannis happy. Okay. But they have their first round pick in 24, and then they have first round picks out into 26, 28, 29, and 30. But like, that's it. They do not have a lot of draft capital. And I say that to remind everybody that if you're Milwaukee and you're facing down the precipice of a disaster of losing Giannis, well, let's go ahead and lose him for a whole bunch of assets for some young players, right? Like when it's time to push the rebuild button, you need to be ready to do that. And they have a lot of veteran talent potentially to do so. Specifically then to the Nets, what is all this to me? This is like a little cloud. It's like a little rain cloud forming over the positive Nets season that could be incoming with a healthy Ben Simmons, Mikal Bridges taking the next step, all the things that we've talked about from a narrative standpoint. If it's not a Milwaukee, a Boston, or a Miami, and it ends up now the Knicks, I guess, are out of this. Is there any other team to you that stands to maybe pursue Dame Lillard in the Eastern Conference that you would say, oh, this makes things more difficult? You mentioned Philadelphia, right? That might be the prime example. I think they're still clearly ahead of the Nets in the hierarchy of the Eastern Conference. If the Knicks aren't in the mix, then you start to look behind them. There's not a lot of viable options here. So at the top, I was concerned that this was going to make it harder for the Nets and what they want to accomplish this year. Through the course of this episode, I've actually got a little bit of relief. It doesn't seem like there's going to be a viable team that moves ahead of Brooklyn in the pecking order. If anything, it'll be a team that's already there, getting stronger by adding Dame.
Yeah, the East is still going to be a tough sledding for the Nets, even if Lillard stays in Portland, right? Because they were sixth they hung on to sixth last year, and the Heat probably underperformed. The Heat underperformed, and for the regular season probably, and I don't know. And you figure some of these teams are going to make a little bit of a push here, like the Pacers and the Magic. I'm not concerned about any of those teams underneath them getting Lillard at all. So, Pacers, Wizards, Magic, Hornets, Pistons, like they're not trading for him at all. Bulls don't have the capital. I'd be like a little worried about the Bulls probably, but if they got him, but I don't think they can get him. Yeah, I don't think they got
saying could they get there though? Yeah,
they unloaded stuff with Vooch, and I don't think that which is again, this is just such a disaster trade for them. But I think they don't really have the capital to go out and do it, but that would be an interesting one. It's like, oh, you want to just go all offense here and just make a splash and just try to be relevant. I don't know what they're doing anyway. That'd be an interesting one. I just don't think they can get it done. But I'm not too concerned with the teams here at the bottom because they're just not going to do it. They're not going to, even like the Hawks, like they have right. Trey and DeJounte. They're not going to bring in another guard. So there's some teams either positionally like the Knicks or the Hawks that just don't, it doesn't make any sense for them to do it positionally. There's teams at the bottom. They're just too young and up and coming that don't want to put Lillard on here. It really only ends up being like 4 teams in the East. And those teams were honestly, be better than the Nets anyway. So it's just like, it doesn't, from that standpoint, it doesn't change the Nets' fate too much. Those teams cannot add Lillard and they're significantly better than Brooklyn.
losing by a foot, losing by a mile. We're still behind. Either way, I'm still watching your taillights go away from me. I did scroll across the Pacers just there for a second without going a mile deep on what that situation could look like. Again, these are all speculated on the idea that you're going to send Dame somewhere he may not want to play. But the Pacers actually kind of become a little bit interesting if I
got
dug a little deeper
Halliburton.
on
They're
what
not
they could
doing it.
do.
Like they're not.
Yeah.
These teams. There's just like remember Lillard is old-ish and like an old aging guard. Like and with a ton of money. It takes a very specific situation. I do.
Yeah.
I like I said. I'm glad we talked about this because I guess we can get out of here after this. But again, it cooled off in terms of talk, but this still is a fascinating situation. It's no less fascinating than it was in the spring. It's just being talked about a lot less because, again, like the summer, it's really the dry season when it comes to NBA news. Teams just and personnel just go on vacation. Guys are just getting back to the facilities now for pickup and getting ready for the season. Like after Labor Day, like everyone's kind of back after Labor Day, and so we're a week or two past that. And now I think you're going to see this heat back up again. But the situation itself is still could like alter some of the NBA landscape. It's just we just haven't talked about it for 2 months.
Okay, so my closing thoughts on this are one, that in a weird way, taken in the spirit it's intended, Damian Lillard's situation feels closer to Russell Westbrook than it does to Kevin Durant in terms of the money that's on this guy's contract, the willingness for teams to, pursue him. It's not about the state of his play. It's not about whether he's still good, but the impact that you mentioned there about what the money is and the willingness to commit to that with the age factor. No one is clamoring the way they did for Kevin Durant, and some people are just waiting. We always talked about Russell Westbrook. It's like, well, once you take away the money, he's still a decent player, and you could have him on your roster. Damian Lillard's a far better player than Russell Westbrook. And if you took away the money, there'd be a lot of teams that will want Damian Lillard on there. But big contracts impact the way you look at them. The other then piece for me is from a net standpoint, let's at least have that discussion very quickly. If the price is coming down and it's not as significant, it's not as big a deal. Should the Brooklyn Nets at least be in the okay, it's not going to be everything in our treasure trove and we still could pursue a star down the road? Should the Nets be at all in the market to have that discussion for Damian Lillard if the market is dried up to the point where Portland is saying we'll take maybe, quote, what we can get to get this money off the books? How low would the price have to go? Let's put it that way, right? How low would the price have to go?
You have to be so low, and you have to get off Simmons, and maybe some Nets fans would say like, oh, he's going to bounce back and he's going to be better than Lillard because he's going to get back to his old form. Like I don't, the Simmons stuff has been before when Lillard, it was kind of like, oh, can we get off the Simmons contract? We're like, oh, they would never take it. Now the narrative around Simmons has shifted a little bit. I still would probably, if you could do that and get rid of the risk, I'd probably think about doing it. Mm-hmm. But I can see why you would just want to stand pat here also. So I don't know. If it got really low, sure. I think so. The contract is probably still a little problematic, but the Nets aren't vying for any kind of contention over the next 3 years anyway.
Right.
Though you want to say like, oh, you don't want to unload those Suns picks and the Dallas picks because they're like really high value. I don't know. I'd probably still say no, but it would sure make this season more interesting. I think from that perspective, maybe if you want to get a little greedy about it, then maybe, but probably not now.
So we'll see how it plays out here. Obviously, as we head towards training camp, I think it will heat up. And I do oddly enough, even though it has been quiet, I anticipate that something does happen here. And I think sometimes when you hear a Mark Spears, a Woj, a Shams, anytime you start to get a little bit of a buzz or just the conversation starts to dial up again, it's usually indicative that, hey, we're ready to do something here, but everybody wants to move on to this thing potentially. I wonder how long it bleeds over, because if you get to the season and Damian Lillard is still a Portland Trailblazer, that only starts to get worse and worse, I think, not only for the Blazers, but for other teams as well, because then you're playing games and then you're worried about health and you're worried about the assets you want to send out. So fascinating stuff. In some ways, I'm kind of happy that the Nets aren't overly involved in this, because it means that you can just go into the season with reasonable expectations, something we're going to talk about to close out this week, rotations, filling out the lineup, and where players fit best for Brooklyn.
All right. Couple things when we get out of here. Make sure you join Subtext /Locked On Nets. Get in on the conversation. we're just texting about the Nets all day long over here. We're, when we get closer to the season, be pregame, postgame, injury stuff, all that kind of jazz during the season. And then just like random Nets talk that we just don't get anywhere else because, we're sitting in our houses thinking about the Nets, but maybe don't have someone to talk to about it. That is where Subtext solves it for you. Go join the conversation with Adam and I at Subtext. Join subtext.com/LockedOnNets.
Damian Lillard said if he doesn't get traded from the Portland Trailblazers, every day that you see me, quote, that means every single day that you see me, that's on the worst day of my life. It's actually Peter from Office Space.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.